Hi, and welcome to St. James. We're glad that you're joining us. Today, we're going to actually be starting a new series. We're going to be looking at parables, and especially some of the parables from the Gospel of Mark. And as we take some time and look at the parables, we're just going to be listening, especially listening out for what is God saying to us here and now. You see, the parables are simple stories. That's what they are. But they're laid next to our lives. They're always laid next to something far greater. Parables about things that are everyday, common occurrences, yeast, seeds that grow. And yet, they're going to talk about huge and important things. What heaven is like, what our lives are supposed to be like. They take those simple everyday things and help us to ask those big questions that we all ask, that people have asked in every generation. Who am I? And what is life all about? And so I hope you'll join us as we go through and as we look at some of these different parables, especially as we look and try to understand, well, who Jesus is, especially by listening to what he taught. We can get a feel for, well, who is this Jesus of Nazareth by what he teaches us and how he shows us to live. And so we're going to actually look at the parable of the lampstand. It comes from Mark's Gospel. It's Mark chapter 4, verses 21 to 25. It's a very short piece, and it's a part of a bigger set of parables that Jesus is teaching. And yet we hear Jesus say this to us. Jesus said, "Do you bring a lamp and put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on its stand? For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears, let them hear. Consider carefully what you hear," he continued. "With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more, and whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away." Oftentimes, Jesus' words to us have a wonderful way of bringing us comfort and yet also convicting us. Whenever we're in distress and in crisis, oftentimes Jesus' words are so comforting. And yet so often it's when we can allow ourselves to get comfortable that Jesus' words push us a little bit. I think this parable does both. It offers us some comfort, but certainly it's meant to push us. And it's certainly meant to be laid next to our life. And so what is Jesus even talking about here? Well, he starts off talking about a lamp. Now, obviously today in our electric world with lamps and things that you just flick on, this is a lamp that you would have to light. This would have been like an oil lamp. And we get that. But the premise is still here. If you put a lamp under a bowl or under a bed, one, it doesn't give off any light to the room. If you put it under a bowl, it just suffocates. There's no point to it. And there's a part to hear what Jesus is talking about is our life. That we're meant to allow who we are to shine forth. Especially when we're talking about faith. And especially when we're talking about those fruits of the Spirit. Those things that a life of faith sort of brings out in us. You see, following Jesus, following his way in our life is meant to bear fruit. It's meant to be sort of brought out in things like kindness and goodness, gentleness, graciousness, forgiveness, peace, self-control. If we allow those things to be hidden, if we hide them away or if we don't show them to others, they get snuffed out. And I think we see that so often. In our own world, we see the repercussions of when people don't lead with kindness and goodness, when instead sort of ruthlessness and aggressiveness, when snideness or just selfishness is what allows us and rules the decisions that we make, when that defines who we are, well, certainly that snuffs out that goodness out of life. And to me, it also answers a part of that question. What is the point of life? What is the purpose? And I don't think selfishness and aggressiveness and ruthlessness are really supposed to be a part of that. Jesus certainly teaches, not just here but in other places, how we're called to love our neighbor. We can't love our neighbors if we're living a life that's growing out of selfishness and ruthlessness. We have to let those other parts show and shine forth. But Jesus carries on even further. Whatever is hidden is actually meant to be disclosed. And again, so often we try to hide things. There's that question, who are we? And in this world of cameras and virtual lives and living on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, there is a side to ourselves that we're all guilty of doing this, of putting sort of that best foot forward, that best face forward. We share the Instagram photos or the Facebook photos of us at our top, at our best, those mountaintop moments, and we hide those moments of weakness, of our struggles. Jesus is talking about how we're meant to let our whole life shine. That's both the good and the bad. And it's through the whole of our life that the measure of whether or not we react kind or ruthless really come through. It's easy to act kind to someone who's kind to you, isn't it? I certainly find it. If I go through and get a cup of coffee and whoever the barista happens to be really nice and, they're smiling and say good morning and how are you, it's easy to say good morning. It's the same true if you happen to go and the barista goes, here's your coffee. We're not meant to let those sides of ourselves show, but it's not just show. We're not meant to let those sides of ourselves be our true selves. And sometimes that takes real reflection and stepping back. Certainly the parables invite us to lay Jesus' teachings next to our life and to do some of that personal reflection. Whatever's hidden, though, gets revealed. And I think we know there's truth to that, whether it's in crisis and in times such as this, during a pandemic. Often, maybe it's just we've been trying so hard to keep it from emerging. But who we are truly comes out, because that's who we are. When we get rid of the masks, who we are is who God sees. And so are we allowing that person to live and to breathe? Are we allowing that person to be shaped and formed by God? Jesus goes on further, though. He says, consider carefully what you hear. And then he adds this, with the measure that you use, it's going to be measured against you, and even more. Whoever has will be given more, and whoever does not have, they will have it taken from them. Now, it's easy to sort of mishear what's happening in this parable. And oftentimes we can hear this and we think, well, is Jesus talking about money? And true, Jesus does often talk about money and how we use it, and in parables, but this isn't one of them. This is actually talking about how we live our life. How do we measure to someone else? It goes back to that, how we interact with people. Jesus is all about relationship. The relationship he has with you and I, but also about the relationships that we have with one another. What is the measure that we use in our relationships? Are we kind? Are we gracious? Are we forgiving? Are we loving? Those who have will be given more. Like I was saying, when you have that interaction, even just with someone who, might be giving you coffee, or those kind of quick interactions that we don't even really think about. What we give is often what we receive. And how much more is that true with people who we're close with, that we're intimate with? Our family, our loved ones, our friends. How true as well for us who follow Jesus, if we're meant to be Christ-like, and if we're meant to witness to what Christ has done in our life, if we're not being Christ-like with his grace, with his love, with his forgiveness, well, are we really witnessing truthfully and faithfully to Jesus? The harsh part to this is whoever has will be given more, and whoever does not have, Jesus says, will have it taken away. It is that reminder as well that we are meant to live this way, but truly, life isn't always easy. I think especially now in this moment, when our neighbors to the south are certainly dealing with quite a lot when it comes to things like how do we treat one another? What is the measure of a person? What is their value and what is their worth? And does the color of their skin matter? And let's be honest with ourselves. Here in Canada, you and I, we have a lot of those same systems. It might have a different shape and flavor to it than what it does in America, but we're not innocent. Truly, we all need forgiveness around racism, and whether or not it's been something we've been active or passive in. Perhaps we hear the parable and we need to be reminded of those who have will be given more, but those who do not have, what they have will even be taken away. How do we treat one another? How do we love one another? And especially at this moment, how do we show that love of those who maybe share the privilege that I do? How do we make sure that that privilege doesn't define all of our relationships? Instead, how can love and graciousness and forgiveness and reconciliation and justice define those relationships? Truly, when we look at Jesus and what he taught and how he lived, those are things that we're meant to lay next to our own lives. And so may you keep hearing what Jesus is saying into your life here today. May you keep praying with me that Christ will continue to show us and treat us with his forgiveness and grace. And from there, may we continue to grow in the relationship with him, in the fellowship with one another. May we know his presence and his peace so that we may make his love and his grace known. God bless. Thanks for joining us.